Stevie Nicks, $100 million. Imagine Dragons, $100 million. Lil Wayne, $100 million. Neil Young, $150 million. Bob Dylan, $400 million. I'm not talking about their monthly OnlyFans income. I'm talking about what they got paid to sell their music catalogs to corporate interests. And those numbers may be an all-time high, but the list doesn't end there. RZA, Bruno Mars, Nelly, Taylor Swift, 50 Cent, Drake, Nicki Minaj, Calvin Harris, Shakira, all of these massive artists have either sold their entire music catalogs or seen some of their music catalogs get sold to corporate firms for eye-watering amounts of money. The concept here is pretty simple. A corporation approaches a successful musician in the latter years of their career and offers 10 to 20 years worth of royalties up front in exchange for ownership of their recordings. But who's buying? Why are musicians selling? And what does this mean for the music industry? Let's get into it. This video is brought to you by Skillshare, where my first ever class full of my techniques for animating with After Effects is now available. The first 1,000 people to click the link below will get a free trial of Skillshare Premium membership, where you can access my very own class, plus thousands of other classes on almost any subject you can think of. That's skl.sh/Volksgeist04211. One of the big surface level reasons why buying and selling catalogs has become such a common practice in the past year is actually because of the pandemic. Without touring, artists' overall income fell by a lot. After all, the money from album sales and streaming most often goes back to paying the cost of recording those albums in the first place. One extreme example comes from the band U2, who in 2017 made 96% of their income from touring and only 4% from the sale of music. So it makes sense that, considering for all of 2020 there was no realistic date in mind for when artists could expect to tour again, a lot of artists who make their livings touring older songs would be willing to take an advance payout. In fact, this is exactly why David Crosby of the legendary band Crosby, Stills, Nash & Young sold his catalog. In his words, he could no longer work due to COVID, and money from album sales is far lower than it used to be due to streaming services. In a tweet from last year, he wrote that he has a family and a mortgage, and selling his catalog was his only option to get by for the time being until he can tour again. And this dilemma applies to tons of older artists who aren't streaming as much as they used to and usually make most of their money from playing shows. But the reasons to sell your catalog right now don't end with COVID. Another big motivating factor for artists is taxes. You see, the sale of a music catalog isn't going to be taxed as income. Instead, it counts as capital gains, which is taxed much lower than streaming income. Streams and sales can be taxed up to 37%, but capital gains are taxed at 20%. However, President Joe Biden has talked about how he plans to raise capital gains tax to 39.6% for people who earn more than $1 million per year, which a lot of these artists do. Now, taxes probably aren't the main reason artists are selling their catalogs right now, but if you were thinking about doing it in the first place and a big tax increase like this was on the table, you'd probably do it sooner rather than later. And there's another more morbid reason. Just like Ben Franklin said all those years ago, our Constitution is now established and has an appearance that promises permanency. But in this world, nothing can be said to be certain except death and taxes. Anyway, some of the best-selling artists alive are pretty old right now, and when you get to be that age with that amount of money, it's usually time to start estate planning. And what I mean by that is you have to decide which of your grandkids will inherit your obscene fortune and which will get left with a moldy pallet of unsold merch from your 1995 revival tour. Prince, Aretha Franklin, James Brown, and Tom Petty are four artists who had no wills when they died, and the litigation following all of their deaths became an extremely long and drawn-out process. It's a lot easier to just delegate cash than try and write down how a bunch of intellectual property can be split between multiple parties, and it's better to do it when you're still of sound mind than wait till you're no longer able to make the decision for yourself, as sad as that might sound. Artists who have sold their songs in the last year or so include Stevie Nicks, Imagine Dragons, Neil Young, Ryan Tedder, Scooter Braun, all at valuations of $100 million or more. One of the biggest firms buying these catalogs is Hipgnosis, who spent over $1.7 billion buying songs and albums between March 2019 and September 2020. Given that these firms will literally write a check for an artist's yearly streaming and sales income multiplied by 20 and hand it over, there's tons of money in this business right now, and the experts are calling it a win-win for the buyers and the sellers. I read like 10 articles for research while writing this script, but I still have one big question that none of them answered. What's going to happen to all of this music? I don't want to assume the worst, but Vivendi, the company that bought Bob Dylan's catalog, isn't exactly known for having good corporate ethics. 5 years ago, they were sued by the creators of the 1984 musical comedy film This Is Spinal Tap for over $400 million. They also paid $26 million in fines to the US government after lying about profits and finances in 2017. And they're currently getting sued for over $1 billion by a group of French investors over another lie they told in the 90s. Basically, if you're a Bob Dylan fan, you may not think this is the company that should control his musical legacy. I mean, that's one of the biggest unanswered questions here. This is great for the artists that are getting these huge payouts, but what happens to their music? If the contracts are sketchy, it could easily go further than that, into the realm of corporations re-releasing or reusing old material in a way that not only doesn't fit the artist's vision, but they could actively go against how these artists intended their work to ever be used. Remember how I mentioned Taylor Swift's recordings sold for $300 million? There was a catch to that. Taylor Swift herself doesn't actually own those recordings. She never did. Scooter Braun does, and he bought them from her old label. This is why she's starting to re-record and re-release all of her older albums. Not only does she get to do a more mature, grown-up version of her work, but she also gets to finally earn money off of albums that are now owned by investment firms. You see, while Taylor Swift is the recording artist behind the albums Taylor Swift, Fearless, Speak Now, Red, 1989, and Reputation, the recordings of those albums themselves were owned by her record label, Big Machine. But a few years ago, Scooter Braun's holding company, Ithaca, bought Big Machine, and a year and a half after that, in November of last year, Scooter Braun's company sold the masters to a company called Shamrock Holdings, a notoriously aggressive private equity firm owned by Disney. That's why she's just straight up making new versions of all her old music, because beyond the artistic value, she actually gets to make money off of her own art when a massive corporation, literally Disney, owns the originals. In the end, Taylor Swift's struggle with her master recordings is a pretty tragic finale for this type of story that's becoming all the more common in the music industry. A lot of artists today don't own their masters. There are some truly iconic modern musicians who have no legal right to control their own recordings or profit from them at all. In the end, the boom of boomer musicians selling their intellectual property to corporate firms in exchange for massive payouts is, it doesn't point to the most encouraging future for the music industry. I don't really like imagining a world where Disney owns all of my favorite artists' music. But at the same time, they're making a lot more money off these deals than they may realistically see for the rest of their lives from streaming and sales. Sure, their music may be commercialized because it's literally being bought by some of the most cutthroat, hardball corporations in the industry. But at the end of the day, if your career were coming to a close and someone came to you with an unprecedented offer, enough money to take care of your kids and grandkids and friends and estate and bills for the rest of your life, at the expense of having your intimate art played as a Super Bowl commercial here and there, you too would probably have a hard time saying no. If you want to pursue something creative and learn how to better express your thoughts and feelings through media, I highly recommend checking out Skillshare. I use Skillshare all the time to help me learn new editing techniques and animation skills, and I honestly can't recommend it enough. They offer meaningful membership. There are many different avenues and techniques to explore for each subject, real projects to create, and a great community of people on their site. They empower people to pursue real growth and actually better themselves learning new skills in the process. Their lessons can help you stay inspired, learn how to better express yourself, and introduce you to a community of millions of users. Plus, I just launched my very own class on Skillshare, where I share detailed techniques and information on how to animate in After Effects just like I do for my videos. So I highly recommend checking that out. Anyway, last but not least, a premium annual membership to Skillshare is extremely affordable at less than $10 a month. So if you want to join Skillshare and upgrade your skills, you can get a free trial at the link in the description below. That's skl.sh/Volksgeist04211. Don't forget to take my class and share the results with me on social media so I can like and repost your work. Clicking the link really helps out my channel.